Hello and welcome to BlenderTutor.com. My name is Tom Latvies and this is the 9th tutorial in the Blender Bootcamp Series. In this tutorial we're going to go over animation basics in Blender. So let's get started. Okay, so I'm just going to start with a basic scene here. We're not going to animate anything in particular, but I basically just want to go over the basic tools you're going to be using in Blender to animate anything. So to start off with, I'm just going to go over some of the different areas of your display right now. Down here, obviously in your timeline, this is going to be very important for animating in the 3D object view. When you're just basically moving your objects around in 3D space, this is basically how you're going to time out everything. You're going to start adding keyframes, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, and each frame, basically these numbers are frames. So in film, per se, 1 second of film is 24 frames. Whereas with video, you'll have about 30 frames in the United States, at least, anywhere where there's NTSC. In Europe, it will be PAL, so it'll be 25 frames for both film and television. But wherever you're from, you could set that frame rate right here, actually. In your render settings, you'll have your frame rate right here. So right now I'm defaulting to 24 frames per second, which is standard film frame rate. And you have all these different frame rates, which, if you're animating already, you should probably know what frame rate you'll be working with. But usually I work with 24. 30 is also a pretty normal one, or 29.97 for television. And then, like I said, 25 for PAL. Anything above that will be, really at this point you'll be using this to try to match a frame rate that was shot on video. Anything above 24 or 25 will be video frame rates. So okay, so that's where you'll set that. This is where you'll monitor your timing of your animation. But how do I add an animation in the first place? Well, you're going to have to first position your object where you'd like it to start. So we're going to take this cube and we'll just move it down this way. And I want it to start right there. So what I can do is I can hit the I key on my keyboard, and this will be Insert Keyframe menu. So right now I'm just going to move it with location. So I'll just add a location keyframe. Now if I move this over here, you can see I have a little yellow line right here, and that is that's my keyframe for my cube. If I were to select a different object, like the light, you can see there's no line there because this light is not animated, it's only the cube. So when I select this again, my line is back. We'll move this forward 30 frames, and now I'm gonna move this cube over here. Now if you look, if I move anything in my timeline without adding another keyframe, my cube's going to jump back to its place because there are no other keyframes to hold it there. So basically, once you have a keyframe on something and you try to move it around, you're going to either have to delete that original keyframe or add a new one, or else every time you move your timeline, it'll reset it back to its initial spot. So I'm going to go to frame 30, which you could also see down here, and I'm going to move it over here, and now I'm going to add another location keyframe. And now if we scrub through our timeline, you can see that my cube is moving. Or if I want to play it in real time, I could hit Alt-A and it'll move. Now, right now, if we look down here, this is basically the length of our timeline. So my starting frame is frame 1 and my ending frame is frame 250. So it's a little over 10 seconds at my 24 frames per second. So basically 240 frames would be 10 seconds. Right now we'll just stick with the 30 frames. So I could change this to 30, and now you can see it darkens all that. So now only these lightened frames are active. And now if I were to hit Alt-A to play this, it'll just keep on looping that 30 frames. Now this can get very time consuming adding in these keyframes. And basically, to define what a keyframe is basically the important frames in your animation Blender will use its algorithms to fill in the rest of the frame. So if you're moving from left to right like this, you only have to put the starting and ending frame and Blender will fill in the rest of the frames. But say I want to have a much more complex animation and I want it to rotate and I want it to scale up or scale down and all this stuff to happen, and I want it to go for like 20 seconds. It's going to get really time consuming and complicated to have to continue hitting I every time you add something and hit a location or rotation or whatever keyframe. There is an easier way and a quicker way to add keyframes on the fly. If you come down here, you can hit this little red button, which is the automatic keyframe insertion button. And if I were to hit this, now if I move my cube over to about frame 15, now if I move this up here, you could see there is a new keyframe there. And so it added that by itself. And now if I hit play, it added that and I didn't have to do anything. So now I could go through here and rotate it a little, and I could go over here and rotate it a little, and I could go back to this one and I could scale that up, go to this one and scale it down a little, and now it added all those keyframes for me, and this is very simple, very quick. Now the other thing to keep in mind though is you need to keep an eye on that, because you might be moving an object around just to look at it and forget you have that on, and all of a sudden you're going to start adding all these keyframes that you don't want to add. So just be aware when that's on. If you press it again, it'll turn it off. So now if I were to move this over here, it didn't actually add that keyframe. So that is the basic idea of adding keyframes. But what if I want to look at a more in-depth view of my keyframes? This isn't really telling me much other than what frame the keyframes are on. If I want to look more in depth on that, I could actually go to my animation display up here. So if you go into this drop down menu, go to animation, and now you have all this extra information. It might look scary at first, but it's pretty simple and it's very useful for you. So first you're going to have your 3D viewport over here still. And you'll also have a little camera view right here. So if I were to like move this around, you can see it updating up in that top right corner. But then I also have these two other sheets. So I have these two other views right here. So I have my dope sheet right here, which is basically, if you've ever worked in something like After Effects or anything, this is a common view you'll have where it's showing you your individual keyframes that you could literally just grab and move around, and down here is kind of like your little timeline of telling you what frame you're on, and you could literally just take these and move them around, and it'll, as you can see, just by moving these keyframes, it's affecting my object in the viewport. And then if you want a more in-depth look, you could break this down to which axis it's looking on, rotation, scale, location. So you have a lot to work with, and it'll have one of these for every object in your scene that you're animating. So right now I only have the cube, but if I were to animate the camera or the light as well, it would have these keyframes for all of those. Down here I have my graph editor, which is, if I expand this a little, this is showing me my curves of my keyframes. So like let's look at this from the side again. As I'm playing that, you could see that it kind of, let's go forward a little. So you can see if I go forward one frame, it just moves a very little. Again, it's moving a little faster. And as I go forward more and more, it's going faster and faster up until you hit this peak. And then it starts slowing down again once it's getting to the end. The reason for that is because we have these curves in our line of our keyframes because of the handle type basically of these keyframes. If we were to have, basically if you were just to draw a regular object from one point to the other and just have it animate, it would just move kind of robotically all at one pace, very smooth, but you know, it looks very robotic, like a computer did it. This already kind of speeds it up and slows it down. It looks a little nicer, but you might not want that. You might want it to look robotic or automatic, something like that. You could change that in here. So right now, if I grab this, and I'll just highlight all of these keyframes, if I were to hit T with these keyframes selected, basically, it's going to let me change the interpolation of my keyframes. So I could have, right now, I believe it's this one right here, but if I want linear, if I want straight, like a robotic movement, I could select that, and now you can see they're straight lines instead of those curved lines. So I'm going to do that, and now we could watch the animation and see what it looks like. So you can see it's very kind of bumpy and jagged, and it's not so smooth anymore. For different types of animation, you're going to want that, and for different types of animation, you're going to want the smoother style. So I'm gonna put that back, and now we can see it's nice and smooth again. And you could literally do that with all of your different movements again. So I have my X, Y, Z movements, I have my rotations, my scales, my location, keyframes. They're all going to be in there. So there's a lot to play around with, a lot to learn. I would actually recommend, one second, BlenderCookie.com actually has an animation series that I believe they're releasing very soon. If you're interested in animation in Blender, I would definitely check that out. They also have one that came out about a year or so ago called like the Blender Cookie Blender Baker series, I believe. And of course, it looks like Blender Cookie is not loading right now, but I'll have the link in on the website. You should check that out. That looks very promising. And they actually just released a free animatable character with a full rig that looks very promising. So I'll link to both of those things on the page. But there's a lot you could do in Blender with animation, and it's really, you know, powerful and exciting. So I'll have more tutorials on more in-depth animation, but for now, I'm basically going to leave you with showing you how to render out an animation. So say I'm going to move my camera like right here, and I'm going to frame it a little better, so I'll move it back a little. Oop. I want to see the entire animation in my viewport. Okay, and then I'll move this over here. So we'll give the world setting like a white material. I'll give this cube a dark orange material. Let's see what that looks like. And cool. So we're going to render this out real quick. So to render out an animation in Blender, there's actually a couple ways you could do it, and I'm going to go over the way that I would recommend doing it. Select your resolution and everything. You select your frame rate. So I'm going to just do, I'm going to keep it pretty small. I'll go to 720 resolution. I'll do 50% of that. For samples, I will keep it at, I'll do like 50. Just do a quick animation render. The most important thing you're going to do after setting up all of that is you're going to want to set your output. So basically right here, this is the type of file you're going to be rendering to. And you could either do images, or you could do an actual movie file. And you would think, oh, I'm doing an animation, I want it to be a movie file. I would select one of these. The problem with that is, especially once you have a very complicated scene, once you start rendering out these large, like where you're going to get to a point where you have a scene that takes, you know, 20 minutes per frame to render that out, and say it's a 60-second shot, which is very long, but say you have a 60-second shot at 20 minutes a frame, and about 2/3 of the way through rendering that, Blender crashes for some reason, you're going to lose all of that progress, all of those hours of rendering. Whereas if you were to save them as an image sequence, where you could do like JPEGs or PNGs for smaller files, you could render each frame out as its own image and then combine them into a movie once it's all rendered out. And that way, if it crashes 2/3 through, all you have to do is start rendering on the frame that it crashed on, and you won't lose any time really. So I would recommend doing that. And the other thing is you're going to have to actually select where to save those images. So I'm going to go to animation. I'm going to create a new renders folder. And I'm going to save mine in there. So I'll have PNGs. And cool. So, and then the last thing you're going to do basically is you're going to hit render animation right here, and it's going to save those out. I'm actually going to save this file real quick. Oop. Okay. And I'm going to hit animation, render, and let that start going. And you can see it's animating all these frames. You can see down here, as it renders each frame, it will progress to the next one. See my progress up here, and it's basically saving these. You can see in this output area now, you can see the folder that I selected. And it just finished. So now I have my rendered images out. I'll go open that folder real quick to show you. So now I have all of these separate images actually numbered by the frame, so 1 all the way up to 30. And now if I want to actually play those out to a QuickTime or something, I could go up to video editing, and right here actually, this is our little timeline again. If I hit Shift A, I could add an image, and I could just select all of these, so I could actually just highlight all of those and hit add image strip. And now up here we could see what we have. If I scrub through that, I could actually play that. And actually I guess I'm going to have to move this over. And there we go. So I have this playable image sequence now. And if I want to render this out, let's see. I'm going to change this properties. Save that. And I will save that as well. But I'm going to change this now to, I'll do an H.264 QuickTime. If you go down to encoding, so once you select a movie type instead of a image type, you'll have this encoding tab right here. Under presets, I'll do H.264. Actually, I'm going to want QuickTime, and then with codec I'll do H.264. I can leave all the rest of this the same. I don't have any audio, so I don't have to worry about that. Everything else is fine. And now if I hit render animation, you can see how quickly that just exported. It was only 30 frames, so it's pretty small. So now if we go into there, I have this little movie file now. Play that. And there you go. It's not playing very smoothly, I think, because I have so many other things running, but that is our playable movie that we just exported. So it's pretty simple. And then, you know, once you actually start rendering out multiple shots, you could actually add them all into here, and this is where you'd start editing your movie if you wanted to make an actual animated film. So I'm going to call that an end. This is going to be the last tutorial in the Blender Bootcamp series. And I will continue to update this as it gets outdated, but hopefully for a while it'll be good. And I'm going to continue making new tutorials for Blender, so hope to see you back. Thank you for watching. Bye.